Okay, so today I'm very honored to have Mr. Jim Noteware with me. I'm the host for today, 7 Daily. I'm an assistant professor at University of Houston and teaching Chinese culture and language, literature, and films, all that. And I want to briefly introduce our interviewer today, and who is our really honorable guest. James Noteware is a Houston, Texas-based international businessman specializing in real estate development and investment. He has developed real estate projects and led real estate organizations across the whole United States and in many places throughout the world. His ventures have won numerous awards for innovation, performance, and impact. Mr. Noteware's private sector business career has been supplemented by invitation from 2 big city mayors to lead large public agencies. He served 2 years as the City of Houston's Director of Housing and Community Development, previously in 2003 to 2004, at the nomination of Mayor Anthony Williams of Washington, D.C., and confirmation by the Bush White House. He led the real estate investment, development, and operations of the National Capital Revitalization Corporation, a joint venture between the District of Columbia and U.S. federal government. Besides, Mr. Noteware is active in civic affairs, as co-chair of Houston's International Trade Center, focusing on international trade and investment. He is an active author and frequent speaker on public policy, real estate markets, and international investment. He received a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and architecture from Stanford University and an MBA in finance from the Wharton School. Welcome, Mr. Noteware.
Thank you very much, Melody. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yes, me too. So I know that from your experience that you know so much about China. So we can call in Chinese like 中国通. So I'm very curious as a professor that teaching Chinese culture that today I want to talk about your Chinese experience and your experience of Chinese with Chinese people, Chinese Americans, especially during this time that's where it has a lot of tension.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So from start, tell us a little bit about your latest Chinese experience. When's the last time that you visited China, and what leaves you the most impression? Is it different from when you first visited?
Yes. The first time I visited China was in 1978. And the relations between China on the east and the United States on the west were very young at that time, and so we were just getting to know each other. Over the years, I visited many times, and most recently a few years ago, and every time I visit China, I am very surprised, really astounded by the growth that has occurred. Not just the economic growth, that's what receives so much attention, economic growth, but also growth in the prosperity of the Chinese people, the desire for democracy of the Chinese people, the desire for Chinese people to learn more about the world in general, and of course, the United States. And we are so pleased in the United States with much of the immigration and the capital flows that has occurred here from China. And we welcome Chinese people, both as immigrants and as investors and as visitors. So I am of the belief and the school of thought that the most important thing we can do as people is to get to know each other and to trade with each other for mutual benefit. The more we understand about each other, the better off we are. And I know that in the most recent few years, there are increasing tensions between the United States and China. And my observation is if we want to understand those tensions, and we must understand them if we're going to solve them, the way to understand them is to understand where each group of people are coming from. And that is why I'm so pleased that you are here in Houston at the University of Houston teaching Chinese culture and presumably Chinese history as well to Americans, because very few Americans really understand China. Most Americans love Chinese food, and that's a very good start. But most people, and we understand a little bit about the Chinese government, and we understand the importance of trade. But after that, the understanding is very small. So I spend time with my Chinese American friends here, and I spend time with Chinese people there in China, trying to be a bridge. In fact, I formed a company about 15 years ago called Pacific Ventures, and another company called Pacific Bridges. The idea is to bridge our cultures and our economies and our trade across the great big Pacific Ocean.
所以刚才诺维金先生是说他最后一次访问中国是在几年前，但是他在70年代的开始就已经访问过中国了。他说在这么多年中，他觉得中国的变化真的很大，不仅是经济上有很大的提高，而且人们在各方面的生活水平都提高了。那中国人也更加民主了，所以有很多方面都给他很大的鼓舞。那他觉得由此他非常鼓励在中国来的同胞们，无论他们是在这里的只是访问，还是移民，或者是在这边投资。那他觉得这里的中国华侨移民都给美国带来了很多的经济来源，还有资金来源，还有人才的流动，所以他觉得我们应该互相了解，就中国人和美国人之间应该互相了解对方的文化文学，还有各方面。那最近有更加就是大家也听说过，双方的压力越来越大，且关系也不大紧密，就是受到打击。但在这情况，他很希望就想跟其他人一起做到桥梁作用，而且他在15年前其实也建立了2个公司，那这2个公司呢都是充作桥梁的作用的。Okay, so Mr. Northware, so talking about your contribution as a bridge, I'm very impressed, and I think a lot of Americans should learn from you that being a bridge of the two cultures, and that's also my goal as a professor, that as you see, and you said, like teaching Chinese culture to Americans so we can deepen understanding of each other. So talking about culture, I'm sure a lot of my students and other Americans would want to hear your experience of Chinese culture. So now there would be a lot of rumors saying that, well, the tension is going worse, so maybe there's no need to learn Chinese language anymore or Chinese culture anymore. I know that you've been to China since the 70s, and then you've been to Taiwan, Hong Kong, like Tibet, like different places of a Sinophone area as well. What's your experience of learning Chinese culture, and why do you think it's necessary and in today's day and age?
Well, because if we have difficulties between, or even as we're friends and we're growing together, there is an expression in the United States in English from the American Indians that used to occupy North America before the people from Europe arrived here. And they said, if you want to understand someone, walk a mile in his shoes. And so I try to walk either in somebody else's shoes or right next to them. And the best thing to do is to go visit them and in their own environment, because then you understand their priorities, then you understand their goals, and you understand the reasons that they think the way that they do, and therefore make decisions and movements the way that they do. And one of the things I've learned by dealing in China, but also other parts of the world, the Middle East, Europe, Latin America, is that human nature is the same everywhere. What do most people want? Most people want safety and security. They want a stronger future, particularly for their children. And they want opportunity to grow and succeed. And if we can figure out how to provide the opportunity, not just the current conditions, but the opportunity to grow together, then I think we will be successful. We also have another expression in the United States, and this has to do with trade, international trade. You don't shoot your partner. In other words, if you're trading together, then you succeed when I succeed. And I do better when I do better with you, and you do better when you do better with me. And so, recognizing all of that, when President Nixon, back in 1972, and his then Secretary of State, Mr. Kissinger, went to see Chou En-lai, they did it with the objective of opening up the two cultures, the two economies, and trade. What the United States understood at that time is we represented a very large economy, and a very large economy that is full of American consumers that demand a lot of goods. What China had was a large number of people that had great productive capacity. So it was pretty obvious to take our demand and build Chinese supply. And so China then very quickly, over 20 years, built a very large export economy to the United States and through the United States to other parts of the world, particularly to Europe. And that has been the basis of Chinese growth that I referred to earlier, Chinese growth in the economy, but also the growing curiosity and perspective of the Chinese people about going to other parts of the world, and they then learn how the other parts of the world behave and the people there think. That gives Chinese people a broader perspective as well.
对，刚才威金先生说了很多点，那我在这里，我相信观众朋友们也知道大概的意思，所以我就简单说一下就好了。那他提到就是中美的，我就是问的问题，就是说为什么在这个时候觉得研究中国文化或学习中国文化是非常必要的。那他也提到了有一些名言，比如说在中文里面我们可以说知己知彼，百战百胜，就是说知道对方他们自己的想法，还有理解他们的文化，那对我们做出抉择和跟他们交流都是非常有用的，并且他也相信就是人性都是一样的，比如说想给自己的家庭提供安全安稳的生活，然后另外就是创造更多的机会，所以他相信如果我们找到方法能创造机会一起成长的话，那对两个国家两种文化来说都是有益处的。So just render, roughly the information since you covered so much, particularly actually still talking about the culture. I remember seeing from your resume or your relationship with Chinese culture that you are a friend of Li Cunxin. So he interests me a lot because I've seen the movie, and I personally also like to dance. I'm not a professional dancer, but I do Chinese dance.
Yep.
I actually include his movie, adapted, of course, adapted from his very famous autobiography, Mao's Last Dancer.
Yes.
Story is very impressive, and so I actually use it in my class. Could you tell us a little bit what's your relationship with him and what his story tells you?
Okay, very good. Lee is a phenomenal person. Obviously, everyone understands his skill at dancing. We all understand that. But we also, and the point of the movie and the point of his book was his courage to come to the United States, to travel all around the world on behalf of the People's Republic of China, but his courage about staying here and not going home. And now he lives in Australia. But because he left in Houston, I know his immigration attorney very well. Charles is a phenomenal man. And I know his best friends here in Houston, Clayton and Ginya Trier. Whenever Lee and his wife come to Houston, they stay in the home of Clayton and Ginya Trier. In fact, my wife is a very close friend of Ginya Trier, and my wife and Ginya have ridden their bicycles literally all over the world, in Korea, in Indonesia, in other places, in Argentina. So our families are quite close. And Lee has been very helpful to me when he visits Houston to explain many things. And what he says is he's so happy to be in the United States, and he's so happy to live in Australia, which is very similar to the United States, because we welcome people from all over the world. The United States has been built on immigration. People who come here for freedom, for opportunity, to escape oppression, to have the right to vote, and therefore to select their own form of government, to undertake business. And Lee has always said to me, Jim, I know you're interested in China, and I know you're interested in doing business in China, but be very careful when you do business in China. Be very careful about intellectual property. Be very careful about the legal system and the rules and investments. Many of the protections that you enjoy in the United States may not be in place in China. And so be very, very careful. And so because of his advice, I have adopted certain ways of doing business in China and to be careful. And in the United States, and I think you know, Melody, that we have the rule of law, and we say justice is blind. It doesn't matter who you are. Everyone is treated equally under the rule of law. That does not exist in very many other places in the world, including in China. And so who you are makes a lot of difference. And so we Americans sometimes forget that our protections given to us by the U.S. Constitution, they end when we leave the borders of our country. And so that's why we have to be careful. But Lee is a great example of the kind of people that we want to attract here to the United States and Australia. My wife and I have 4 grown children, and one of 3 daughters and a son. And one of our daughters lives in Australia, and she is having a similar experience there that Lee and his wife are enjoying as well.
刚才我们讲的是就是诺金先生跟李存信一个很出名的在以前在休斯顿的舞蹈家，就是从中国过来的舞蹈家，他现在住在澳大利亚他在描述他们之间的关系。因为时间的关系呢，我就不多解释了，我们就接下来谈。Yeah, because we are running short on time, so I'm
always run short on time. There is always so much to say.
Yes, exactly. But you mentioned, a couple points just now from your relationship with Li Cunxin that I'm very interested to hear more. One is that you mentioned that, all the Chinese protocols may or Chinese motifs will make Chinese people or Chinese Americans do this way of dealing with business different from the United States. So I know that you've dealt with a lot of businesses, especially in real estate development, and I'm sure that I heard that there are a lot of Chinese that like to invest in real estate in the United States.
Oh, yes. Chinese people like real estate. Yes.
Exactly. So what's your experience of dealing with Chinese and Chinese Americans in terms of, business in this sector?
Most of my experience in dealing with Chinese Americans has been here in the United States. In the United States, we again have the rule of law, and real estate tends to be very expensive. You have to have a lot of money. Either you have it or you find other people who do, and you form partnerships, and you ask them to invest, and people invest together. The most important factor for success in any investment, including especially real estate, is what we call alignment of interests. Everyone has to have the same commitment to the same goals. If we come together to make an investment and your goals are different than mine, we will not be successful because we will try to take from each other. What we need to do is to put things together. That is a concept that sounds simple, but it is very difficult to manage in practice. And I have had many experiences with Japanese investors. And I must tell you I'll tell you a story. Maybe we're running out of time. I'll save the story for the next time that we get together. But in the United States, we have a concept called fiduciary responsibility. It's part of the law. It means that if you and I are partners, we are together, I have a duty to treat you with the same care that I treat myself. That is very, very important. And another thing that comes along in the difference between Chinese culture in business and American culture in business, here in the United States, we use a lot of lawyers, a lot of accountants, and other professionals. We rely on them, and they give us advice. They help protect us, and they make sure that things are done properly. My experience with many Chinese people is they do not use professionals, particularly accountants and lawyers, anywhere near to the same degree we do. Many Chinese people think that if they have relationships with other professionals, it signals weakness on their part, like they should be willing and able to do everything for themselves. My observation is the strongest person is the one who delegates and has trust in other people. So having good professionals is a sign of strength, not weakness. But it takes a great deal of skill and experience to manage people together. And so one of the things we find is when people come together, they don't have the same understanding of what it is. If if we as Americans rely on lawyers and accountants, and there are certain rules and traditions, customs that govern the way we do things, if somebody from afar, like China, comes and they want to do things differently, it's very difficult to get together. Mm-hmm. And so when Chinese, one of my experience in the United States is when Chinese people come from China to the United States, they want to do things here like they did there. Mm-hmm. But the most important thing is, like when I go to China, I understand I have to do things their way, okay? But when Chinese people come here, it takes a while for them to learn. But one of the good news is, since 1972, okay, that's been almost 50 years, we now have in the United States almost 50 years of experience that many Chinese Americans, like some of my best friends, are Chinese American lawyers who went to Stanford, went to Harvard, went to all the people. And so they are now bicultural. They now know both cultures, both business, both forms of law, and they themselves are bridges. So we have a lot of opportunity that way. And very often when I go to China, I bring some of those people with me because they help me understand what goes on there. And you mentioned earlier in our conversation language, and language is very important. But even more than language is the culture that language helps explain. And given that we are out of time, I will leave you with just one more thought, if that's okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay. I would go ahead and translate, okay?
Oh, yeah, but I think, I could just summarize quickly.
Okay.
主要是提到这个利益共通点。所以刚才诺金先生就提到说，在美国就是有这法律的保护，所以呢，一般是有利益共通的，而且就是对待自己的同伴，就是对待自己的商业伙伴呢，是跟对待自己是要一样的。所以但是呢，他有遇到中国的伙伴或者贸易伙伴的时候，可能会觉得就是有时候会产生误会，因为这边呢会使用很多的律师、会计之类的专业人士，但是他们利用的不多。但是呢，72年以来的中美建交之后，就有很多这种能通双文化的这一些桥梁人物，所以这些桥梁人物呢就起到很重要的作用。Yeah. So, I think there's so much to talk about based on your experience. So since we don't have enough time, so we'll leave all to next. But one last question though, which, connects to the current pandemic. So I was wondering, you mentioned earlier in Li Cunxing, example that, America is a country of immigrants. Yeah, so because America has been providing opportunities and democracy to a lot of us. However, there are a lot of cultural blockages that created by the pandemic and the current administration, including, of course, visa delays, travel and all those restrictions. And what's your take on that? And how do you suggest we do, as people who can be the bridges? What should we do in this time?
Boy, that's a very, very good question, because the pandemic has exposed weaknesses in our American system, the management of our government services and bureaucracies. It has put so much new load on the system, and so many people are being hurt by and confused by the difficult situation right now. The only simple answer I can give, there are many, many complicated answers, but the only simple answer I can give is to be patient, to be perseverant, to always tell the truth, have personal integrity, and have a strong network of relationships wherever you are, including in the United States. For instance, if someone is like one of your students, Melody, and they lose their student visa, or their enrollment status changes, or the pandemic changes their personal status, they don't know which way they're going to go. They don't know what. So what's important is they have what we call a safety net here in the United States to be around other people that can help take care of them, because it may take time. Well, that's one of the other things that's different between Chinese and Americans. Americans are very impatient. We want everything right now. And Chinese people say, well, we're impatient too, but we have a culture that goes back thousands of years. And I say, well, that's fine. I don't have thousands of years. I need to get it done tonight or tomorrow. Yeah. So, but patience is very important.
对对，刚才诺金先生也讲到了新冠病毒这种情况，也造成了很大的影响，特别在美国政府也突出了自己的弱点。那在这种情况下，像我们这种懂商文化的人，就需要有信心、耐心、有恒心，并且诚实正直，建立良好的关系。So let me close off by saying that I do know Noteware is one of the great examples of being bridges of like Chinese and American culture, and it is most in time and so timely solution and contribution to this time. When there is a lot of tension. And I would use one of his company's operating slogan to close our interview today. He said, make money, have fun, do good in addition. And I would say, in addition to what he said, patient perseverance and all that. And good luck to you. And so nice to talk to you, Mr. Noteware. And I look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you, Melody. I look forward to it as well.